Rain had just stopped falling over Chicago, leaving the streets slick and shining under the evening lights. Detective Commander Emily Carter leaned back in the rear seat of a yellow taxi, exhausted after a week of non-stop work. For the first time in months, she had taken a few days off. Her younger sister was getting married, and Emily had promised herself she would attend the wedding not as a police commander, but simply as a sister. That was why she wasn't wearing her uniform. Instead, she wore a simple navy blue dress and a light jacket. To anyone looking through the taxi window, she appeared to be an ordinary passenger heading home after a long day. The driver, a middle-aged man named Daniel Ruiz, glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You don't mind if I take the east route, ma'am?" he asked. Emily looked up from her phone. "Why? Is traffic bad?" Daniel hesitated. "Not exactly." His fingers tightened round the steering wheel. "Most drivers avoid Main Harbor Road after sunset." Emily noticed the nervousness in his voice. "Why?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "Because of Officer Rick Malone." The name meant nothing to Emily. "What's wrong with him?" The driver shook his head. "Let's just say, if Rick stops you, your night is over." Emily became interested. "What do you mean?" Daniel glanced around before speaking. "Everyone knows it. Taxi drivers, delivery workers, small business owners. He finds reasons to fine people who haven't done anything wrong. If someone argues, things get worse." Emily remained silent. She had heard rumors before. Every large department had a few officers who believed a badge gave them unlimited power. But rumors and proof were two different things. Daniel continued. "Last month, my cousin lost a week's earnings because of him. Another driver got his vehicle impounded. Nobody complains because they're afraid." The words bothered her. "What about internal affairs?" Daniel laughed again. "People like us don't have time for investigations. We just try to survive." Emily stared out the window. The city lights, blurred against the wet glass. Part of her wanted to dismiss the story as exaggeration. Another part knew that corruption often survived because ordinary people stopped believing anyone would. "Listen." The taxi turned onto Main Harbor Road. Suddenly, Daniel's face lost color. "Oh no." Ahead, flashing blue lights reflected across the pavement. 3 patrol cars blocked part of the street. Several officers stood beside them, and in the center was a tall officer with broad shoulders and a permanent scowl. Officer Rick Malone. Daniel swallowed hard. Maybe he'll stop someone else. But Rick's eyes were already fixed on the taxi. He raised one finger. The signal was clear. "Pull over, Daniel." Parked near the curb. Before he could speak, Rick stormed toward the driver's side window. "What seems to be the hurry?" he barked. Daniel immediately became defensive. "Officer, I wasn't speeding." Rick ignored him. "License." Daniel handed it over. The officer barely glanced at it, then he smirked. "Looks like you've got several violations." Daniel's eyes widened. "What violations?" "Don't play games with me." Emily watched carefully. Rick hadn't checked any system, hadn't used a radar gun, hadn't even inspected the vehicle, yet he had already decided the driver was guilty. Interesting, very interesting. The officer leaned closer. "You're looking at a $700 citation." Daniel looked as if the air had been knocked out of him. $700. For what? Rick smiled. Not the smile of a law officer, the smile of a man who enjoyed watching others panic at that moment. Emily noticed something unexpected. A delivery van parked 50 yards away. Its driver wasn't leaving. Instead, he was secretly recording everything on his phone, and judging by the fear in his eyes, this wasn't the first time he'd witnessed something like this. What Emily didn't know yet was that this single traffic stop was about to trigger a chain reaction that would expose years of corruption hidden inside the department. And before the night was over, someone far more powerful than Officer Rick Malone would be forced to answer for it. But when Rick demanded money instead of issuing an actual ticket, Emily realized this wasn't just roadside harassment. It was something much bigger, and someone in the department might already be helping him cover it up. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Rainwater dripped from the edge of a nearby street sign, while Officer Rick Malone stared at Daniel Ruiz as though he had already been convicted of a crime. $700, Rick repeated. Or we can do this the hard way. Daniel's face turned pale. Officer, please. I haven't broken any law. There must be some mistake. Rick stepped closer. Mistake. The officer laughed. The mistake was arguing with me. A few officers standing nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. They clearly heard everything, but none of them said a word. Emily Carter noticed that. Immediately. Fear, not respect. Fear. Fear. That was the reason nobody challenged him. Rick flipped open a small notebook and pretended to write something. Failure to obey traffic regulations. Unsafe operation. Reckless driving. Daniel's jaw dropped. Those things aren't true. Are you calling me a liar? The driver's hands began trembling. People walking along the sidewalk had started slowing down to watch. Food delivery rider stopped his bike. Two construction workers stood near a corner. The delivery van driver, Emily had noticed earlier, was still recording from a distance. WORDLESSLY. Carefully, as if he had seen this exact scene before. Rick suddenly pointed toward the taxi. Step out of the vehicle. Daniel hesitated. I said get out. The driver slowly obeyed. The moment he stepped onto the sidewalk, Rick grabbed the front of his jacket. Gasps came from nearby. Witnesses. Emily's eyes narrowed. The situation had just crossed a line. Officer Daniel pleaded. Please let go of me. You should have thought about that before breaking the law. Didn't break any law. Rick shoved him backward. The driver nearly lost his balance. That was enough. Emily opened the taxi door and stepped outside. Her heels clicked softly against the wet pavement. That's unnecessary. Rick turned for the first time. His attention shifted toward her. What did you say? Emily remained calm. I said, that's unnecessary. The street became silent. Even the bystanders seemed curious about how far this would go. Rick looked her up and down. You got a problem? I have a problem with someone abusing authority. The officer's expression darkened. Mind your own business. It became my business the moment you assaulted him. Several witnesses exchanged surprised looks. Nobody usually spoke to Rick that way, especially not a civilian. The officer took 2 slow steps toward Emily. You think you're some kind of lawyer? No, reporter. No, Rick smirked. Then maybe you're just someone looking for trouble. Emily crossed her arms. Or maybe I'm someone asking why you keep inventing violations. For a brief moment, Rick looked genuinely caught off guard. Then anger replaced surprise. His face reddened. His voice grew louder. You know what your problem is. Emily said nothing. You don't know when to stay. Quiet. The crowd continued growing. Several people had their phones out now. Rick noticed it too, and that made him even more dangerous. Men, like him, hated witnesses. He pointed toward both Emily and Daniel. Congratulations. What for? Emily asked. You're both coming with me. Daniel froze. What? Rick smiled coldly. Obstruction. There was no obstruction. There is now. Two patrol officers looked uncertain. One of them quietly said, Rick, maybe we should just issue the citation. Rick cut him off immediately. You, giving orders now. The younger officer instantly stepped back. Emily noticed something important. Not only was Rick corrupt, he controlled the entire atmosphere around him. People obeyed because they feared becoming his next target. But fear had consequences, and tonight those consequences were beginning to stack up. The delivery driver kept recording. The crowd kept growing. The younger officer looked increasingly uncomfortable. Every action Rick took was creating another witness, another potential statement, another piece of evidence, a domino effect, and he didn't even realize it. Rick motioned toward a patrol car. Take them both to the station. Daniel looked horrified. Emily remained surprisingly calm. In fact, she almost looked willing. The driver leaned closer and whispered, Ma'am, shouldn't we leave? Why are you going with them? Emily glanced toward the growing crowd, then toward the delivery van, then toward Rick. Faint smile appeared on her face, because she had just realized something. This wasn't a one-night operation. This man had been doing this for a very long time, and if she left now, she'd only stop one incident. But if she followed him, she might expose everything. As officers escorted them toward the patrol vehicle, Rick believed he had won. What he didn't know was that every witness he created tonight was about to become a threat to his entire career, and the moment they entered the station, Emily would discover evidence far worse than roadside extortion. As the patrol car doors closed, the delivery driver secretly uploaded his recording online. Within minutes, the video began spreading across local community groups, setting in motion a chain of events that neither Rick nor Emily could yet see coming. The ride to the station was quiet. Daniel Ruiz sat in the back of the patrol car, staring through the window as city lights flashed past. His stomach felt like it was tied in knots. Across from him, Emily Carter looked unusually calm. Too calm. Daniel couldn't understand it. Most people would have been terrified after being detained by a police officer. Yet Emily sat there as if she had already seen the ending of a movie everyone else was still watching. You don't seem worried, Daniel finally said. Emily glanced at him. Should I be? We're being taken to a police station by a man who can apparently do whatever he wants. Emily looked out the window. People like Rick Malone only seem powerful when nobody challenges them. Daniel sighed. Easy to say. The patrol car pulled into the station parking lot. A large brick building stood beneath bright floodlights. Officers moved in and out of the entrance while patrol vehicles lined the lot. For most citizens, it looked like a place of safety. Tonight, Daniel wasn't so sure. Inside, Rick Malone marched through the front doors as if he owned the building. Several officers greeted him. Others quickly looked away. Emily noticed that too. Nobody appeared surprised by his behavior. That was troubling. It suggested this wasn't a rare incident. It suggested a pattern. A dangerous one. Rick pointed toward a wooden bench near the waiting area. Sit. Daniel obeyed immediately. Emily sat beside him. Rick smirked. Maybe spending a few hours here will teach you both some respect. Then he disappeared down a hallway. Daniel buried his face in his hands. My wife is probably worried sick. Emily spoke softly. What's her name? Maria. And your children? Daniel looked surprised. Lucas and Sophia. Emily nodded. Then focus on them. What do you mean? Focus on getting home to them. Daniel laughed nervously. That sounds impossible right now. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she observed the station, every movement, every conversation, every face. Years of investigative work had trained her to notice details most people missed. A receptionist quietly avoided eye contact whenever Rick walked past. A young officer appeared nervous whenever Rick gave instructions. Even the desk sergeant seemed uncomfortable. Fear again. The same fear she'd seen on the street. Then something unexpected happened. Rick's office door remained slightly open. A voice echoed from inside. Rick's voice. Emily listened carefully. Don't worry, Rick said over the phone. Your name won't appear anywhere. A pause, then he laughed. No problem. Just make sure my payment arrives tomorrow. Daniel looked up. Did you hear that? Emily nodded. She had, and it was exactly the kind of thing she needed. Not proof, but a clue. A very important clue. A few minutes later, a nervous young officer approached the bench. His name tag read Officer Parker. He looked around before speaking quietly. You two okay? Daniel blinked. Do we look okay? Parker forced a weak smile. Then he lowered his voice. Listen. Don't sign anything Rick gives you. Emily's attention sharpened. Why? The young officer hesitated. Clearly, he was afraid. Finally, he said, because once you sign, things get complicated. Before Emily could ask another question, Parker quickly walked away. Interesting, very interesting. The dominoes were continuing to fall. First, the witnesses outside, then the video recording. Now an officer inside the station was quietly warning them. Something larger was hiding beneath the surface. About 30 minutes later, Rick emerged from his office. He looked irritated. Bring in the taxi. Driver. Daniel's heart immediately started pounding. The officer pointed directly at him now. Daniel looked toward Emily. For the first time all night, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. What if he takes my license? What if he impounds my taxi? What if Emily interrupted him? Tell the truth. That's it. That's it. Daniel swallowed hard, then followed Rick down the hallway. The office door closed behind them. For several minutes, silence filled the station. Emily waited, watched, listened. Then she noticed something that made her sit up straighter. A bulletin board across the room. Dozens of citizen complaint forms were pinned there. Most looked ordinary, but one name appeared multiple times. Rick Malone. Different dates, different complainants. Same officer. Emily's eyes narrowed. If those complaints existed publicly, how many more were hidden in departmental records? How many people had reported him before, and who had been protecting him? A cold realization settled in her mind. Rick Malone might not be acting alone. Somewhere above him, someone could be helping bury complaints. Someone with influence. Someone powerful. And if that was true, exposing Rick would be far more dangerous than she originally thought. Just then, Daniel's terrified voice echoed from inside Rick's office, followed by Rick shouting something so loudly that half the station turned to look, and whatever had just happened behind that door was about to change. Everything as Emily stood from the bench. She had no idea that Rick had just demanded money from Daniel inside his office, and a hidden security microphone may have recorded every single word. Inside Rick Malone's office, Daniel Ruiz felt as though the walls were closing in around him. The officer sat behind his desk, leaning back comfortably while Daniel stood in front of him like a student being punished. Rick opened a drawer and pulled out a blank citation form. You have two choices. Daniel swallowed nervously. What choices? Rick folded his arms. You pay $300 right now, and this entire problem disappears. Daniel stared at him. And if I don't? Rick smiled. Then your taxi gets impounded. The driver's heart sank. Officer, that's impossible. Not for me. Daniel glanced toward the office door. I haven't broken any law. Rick's smile vanished. You still don't understand how things work around here. The room became silent. Then Rick leaned forward. People think justice matters. His voice dropped, but influence matters more. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The officer wasn't even pretending anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was extortion, pure and simple. Please, Daniel said. I have children. Rick shrugged. Then you should have thought about them before getting yourself into trouble. Tears nearly formed in Daniel's eyes. He slowly reached into his pocket. After a few seconds, he pulled out crumpled bills. $200. Everything he had earned that day. This is all I have. Rick stared at the money, then snatched it from Daniel's hand. We'll call it a partial lesson. Daniel felt humiliated, but he also felt trapped. He turned and left the office. The moment he stepped back into the waiting area, Emily stood up. What happened? Daniel looked devastated. He took my money. Emily's jaw tightened. How much? $200. For the first time that evening, genuine anger flashed across her face. The situation had escalated. Rick was no longer merely threatening people. He was openly collecting money inside a police station. And that changed everything. A few moments later, Officer Parker approached. The boss wants to see you. Emily nodded calmly. It's my turn. Daniel grabbed her arm. Be careful. Emily offered a reassuring smile. Then she walked toward Rick's office. The officer was waiting. His boots rested casually on the edge of the desk. He looked at her like a predator examining. Pray, take a seat. Emily remained standing. "What do you want?" Rick smirked. "I like confident people." "Good for you." The officer's eyes narrowed. "You know, most people become cooperative by now." Emily crossed her arms. "Maybe that's because most people aren't used to standing up for themselves." Rick laughed. Then his expression turned cold. "Let's make this simple." He pointed toward the desk. $200. Emily didn't move. "For what?" "Your freedom." The room fell silent. Emily almost couldn't believe how casually he had said it. Asking citizens for money isn't part of police procedure. Rick leaned forward. "And who's going to stop me?" That single sentence told her everything. He truly believed he was untouchable, not powerful, untouchable, which usually meant someone had protected him for a very long time. Emily looked directly into his eyes. "I won't pay you a single cent." The officer's face hardened. "Wrong answer. I've done nothing wrong. Neither did the last dozen people I brought in." The words slipped out. Before he realized it, Emily caught it immediately. The last dozen people, a confession hidden inside a threat. Another domino had fallen. Rick stood up violently. "You're testing my patience." "No," Emily replied calmly. "I'm exposing your character." The officer exploded. "That's enough." He slammed his fist onto the desk. Several officers outside looked toward the office. Rick pointed at the door. "Take this woman to holding." Two officers hesitated. Neither moved. Rick shouted again, "Now." Reluctantly, they obeyed. Minutes later, the heavy metal door of a holding cell slammed shut behind Emily. The officers walked away. Inside the cell, she remained surprisingly calm. In fact, she almost seemed satisfied, because Rick had made a critical mistake. He had demanded money, taken money, threatened witnesses, and unlawfully detained a citizen. Every decision he made tonight was creating evidence. Outside the cell, Rick felt victorious. He believed he had silenced another troublemaker. What he didn't know was that the video from the traffic stop had already spread across several neighborhood groups online. People were sharing it faster than anyone expected. Former victims were commenting. OD complaints were resurfacing. Questions were being asked, and one particular video clip had just reached someone important, someone with direct access to city leadership. 30 minutes later, headlights swept across the station parking lot. Black SUV rolled slowly to a stop. The engine shut off. The driver's door opened. A sharply dressed city official stepped out carrying a tablet in one hand. His expression wasn't curious. It was furious. Inside the station, nobody had noticed him yet, but the moment he walked through those doors, Rick Malone's entire world was about to begin collapsing as Emily stood quietly inside the holding cell. The city official opened the viral video on his tablet and froze when he recognized the woman Rick had locked behind bars. The black SUV came to a stop in front of the station entrance. The moment the engine shut off, a tall man in a dark overcoat stepped out carrying a tablet. His name was Marcus Reed. As Deputy Director of Public Safety for the city, he rarely visited police stations personally. When he did, it usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Tonight was no exception. Marcus walked through the station doors with purpose. Several officers immediately stood straighter. Others exchanged nervous glances. Everyone recognized him. Everyone except Rick Malone. Rick was still sitting inside his office, counting the money he had taken from Daniel. Earlier he had no idea that his career was already hanging by a thread. Marcus approached the front desk. "I need information." The desk officer stood up immediately. "Yes, sir." Marcus placed his tablet on the counter. A paused video filled the screen. The officer's eyes widened. It was footage from the roadside stop. The same footage that had gone viral online less than an hour ago. Received reports that this woman was brought here. The officer looked closely at the image. Then his face lost color because he recognized her instantly, without saying a word. He pointed toward the holding cells. Marcus followed that direction. His expression darkened with every step as they approached the detention area. A female officer unlocked the security door. "What happened?" she asked nervously. Marcus didn't answer. He simply continued walking. Moments later, he stopped in front of a holding cell. Inside stood Emily Carter. Composed, waiting. The moment Marcus saw her, his eyes widened. For a second, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he turned sharply toward the officers nearby. "Who authorized this?" Nobody answered. The silence was enough. Marcus looked furious. "Open this cell now." The officer hurried to comply. The metal door swung open. Emily stepped out. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Marcus finally said, "Commander Carter." Several nearby officers froze. "Commander." The word spread through the room like electricity. One officer looked at another. Dispatcher nearly dropped her coffee. Even Officer Parker stared in disbelief. Nobody had realized who she was. Emily nodded politely. "Good evening." "Marcus, what happened?" Emily calmly explained everything. The traffic stop, the false accusations, the threats, the money taken from Daniel, the unlawful detention, every detail, with every sentence. Marcus's expression became darker by the time she finished. The station felt unusually quiet. Everyone knew what was coming next. At that exact moment, Rick Malone stepped out of his office. He was smiling. That smile disappeared instantly. His eyes moved from Marcus to Emily and back again. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Marcus slowly turned toward him. "Officer Malone." Rick forced a nervous laugh. "Sir, I didn't realize we were expecting visitors." Marcus took a step forward. "Did you detain this woman?" Rick looked toward Emily. For the first time all night, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. "Well, yes. Do you know who she is?" Rick's stomach tightened. "No, sir." Marcus didn't blink. "This is Commander Emily Carter." The room went silent. Rick felt the blood drain from his face. His mouth opened. No words came out. "Commander. A police commander." His mind raced through everything that had happened: the roadside confrontation, the threats, the bribe demand, the holding cell. Every terrible decision hit him at once, like falling dominoes, one after another. Emily watched quietly. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She simply looked disappointed, and somehow that felt worse. Rick tried to speak. "Sir." I can explain. No, Marcus interrupted. You can answer questions later. The officer's confidence vanished completely. For the first time, he looked afraid, genuinely afraid. But the nightmare wasn't over, because while everyone focused on the shocking identity reveal, another development was unfolding elsewhere. Earlier that evening, the viral video had encouraged dozens of citizens to come forward online. Former taxi drivers, delivery workers, small business owners, people who had remained silent for months. Some shared stories, others shared photographs. A few shared official complaint numbers, and one former victim uploaded something nobody expected, a recording that appeared to capture Rick demanding money during a previous traffic stop. If authentic, it could destroy any defense he hoped to build. As officers began whispering among themselves, Marcus received a notification on his tablet. He opened the file, listened for a few seconds, then looked directly at Emily. His expression changed immediately, because what he had just heard suggested that Rick Malone's corruption went far beyond tonight's incident, much further. As Marcus replayed the audio recording, his face turned pale. What sounded like a single corrupt officer might actually expose a network of protection operating inside the department, and someone much higher up could be involved. By sunrise, the atmosphere inside the police station had completely changed. Less than 12 hours earlier, Officer Rick Malone had walked through these halls, believing he controlled everything. Now, he sat alone in an interview room under constant supervision. His badge had been taken, his service weapon had been confiscated, and, for the first time in years, nobody rushed to protect him. Outside the room, Commander Emily Carter stood with Deputy Director Marcus Greet and members of the Internal Affairs Division. Throughout the night, investigators had worked non-stop. Began as a simple traffic stop, had become one of the largest internal investigations the department had seen in years, and every hour brought new evidence. A detective entered carrying a thick file. You need to see this. Marcus opened the folder. Inside were dozens of citizen complaints. Many had never been properly investigated. Some had been marked as resolved, despite having no follow-up records. Others had mysteriously disappeared from the official system before being recovered from archived databases. Emily studied the files, different victims, different dates, different circumstances, yet the same name appeared again and again. Rick Malone. The pattern was impossible to ignore. For years, people had tried to report him. For years, their voices had gone unheard. But now, the dominoes that Rick himself had set in motion were crashing down all at once. The viral video continued spreading across the city. News outlets picked it up. Radio stations discussed it. Local reporters began contacting former victims. People who had once been afraid suddenly found the courage to speak. By mid-morning, the station lobby was filled with witnesses, willing to give statements. Taxi drivers, delivery workers, restaurant owners, construction workers. Many had never met each other, yet their stories sounded remarkably similar. False accusations, threats, intimidation, money demanded in exchange for avoiding trouble. The evidence kept growing. Then investigators received something even more damaging. Body camera footage, months of archived footage. After obtaining authorization, Internal Affairs reviewed dozens of recordings connected to Rick's patrol activity. Several showed behavior that raised immediate concerns. In some videos, citations were issued without clear violations. In others, recordings ended abruptly during critical moments. One particular file captured a conversation that left investigators stunned. The audio revealed Rick speaking with someone over the phone, a person he repeatedly referred to as the captain. At first, investigators assumed he meant a supervisor, but as they dug deeper, they discovered something unexpected. The calls weren't being made to a captain, they were being made to Lieutenant Harold Bennett, a respected senior officer with nearly 20 years in the department. The room fell silent when the discovery was announced. Emily exchanged a glance with Marcus. The possibility she had feared from the beginning was becoming reality. Rick had not been operating alone. Someone higher up had been protecting him, possibly for years. By noon, Lieutenant Bennett was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied everything, but investigators already had phone records, financial records recovered, complaint files, witness statements, and now recorded conversations. The evidence formed a chain that became impossible to break. One by one, the pieces connected. Missing complaints dismissed, investigations, disciplinary actions quietly buried, warnings ignored. The protection network had finally been exposed. Bennett's silence told investigators everything they needed to know. Hours later, warrants were approved. Both men were placed under arrest as handcuffs clicked around Rick Malone's wrists. He looked around the station, the same station where he had spent years intimidating others, the same hallways where people once lowered their heads when he passed. Now nobody spoke for him, nobody defended him, nobody came to save him. Officer Parker stood nearby, watching. The young officer remembered the fear that had controlled the station for so long. That fear was gone now, and in its place stood accountability. Daniel Ruiz also returned that afternoon. When he arrived, an investigator informed him that his money had been recovered as evidence. The department would also assist him through the legal process. For the first time since the nightmare began, he smiled, not because the money had been returned, but because someone had finally listened. Someone had finally cared. Later that evening, as the investigation continued, Emily stood outside the station, watching the sunset. Marcus joined her. Funny how one traffic stop changed everything. Emily nodded. It wasn't one traffic stop. Marcus looked at her. What do you mean? She watched the orange glow spread across the city skyline. It was years of people staying silent. A moment passed. Then she continued. And one night, when they finally decided not to, the city would talk about the case for months. New policies would be introduced, old complaints would be reviewed, internal oversight, procedures would be strengthened, the investigation would continue. Long after the headlines faded, but one lesson remained clear. Power without accountability eventually destroys itself, because every abuse of authority creates a witness. Every lie creates a crack. Every act of corruption starts a domino effect, and sooner or later, the Last domino always falls. But neither Emily nor Marcus knew that. Another anonymous message had just arrived in Internal Affairs. Inbox containing evidence against it. Completely different officer in another precinct. And if the claims were true, this case had only uncovered the first layer of a much larger problem